It is an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Tarah Wheeler. I'm the CEO of Red Queen Dynamics and Senior Fellow for Global Cyber Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. All that to say, I'm an American, but I'm not here representing the United States government, which means I can get a little spicier than most people can here. I am, again, not only honored to be here, but humbled to be here to speak for the people that I hope I'm always speaking for, the ones that aren't in this room right now. When I think about how we conduct a just cyber war, one that takes into account the rights of civilians and the nature of conflict that may not just be impossible to avoid for a civilian, but not understandable, not something that they even recognize they're in, I think about day-to-day incident response in cybersecurity. I, like so many of you, remember the day, May 12th, 2017. I was sitting in the Orlando Convention Center in Orlando, Florida, in the United States, which is the most American of all American cities. Orlando, Florida, where Disney World is. And I remember midday on May 12th, I was at a cybersecurity training conference, and I remember to this minute watching an entire cybersecurity conference slowly come to a halt, holding their devices, and watching people slide down walls, sit down, crack open laptops, and just sit there as the beginnings of WannaCry in the United States unfolded. I remember so incredibly vividly what the purple and orange carpet looked like. Yes, purple and orange carpet looked like on the floor of this convention center as I and 3,000 other people started incident response for an event that had absolutely crushed the National Health Service in the United Kingdom. That day brought about a lot of really interesting changes in my life on a lot of personal levels, but it inspired me over the course of the next several years to look into the emotional and mental health impacts of cyber attack incident response on incident responders. I started understanding that there is a deep and unspoken expectation that technologists, that the incident responders who are hands-on keyboard after a nation-state cyber attack are just supposed to cope with the consequences of it. And I don't know about you all, and it's not just last night out at the Shamrock and the Depeche Mode bar and every other wonderful location in Talon. I am tired. I am tired. How many of you in this room are part of a chain of emails or messages right now in an active incident response? There they are. You're allowed to be even more tired. And if you raised your hands, I just want to let you know, I took second at a poker tournament over downstairs here on Tuesday night, and I'm buying your drinks tonight. Come up and find me, okay? Don't worry, they deserved to buy you drinks by the time I was done with them. I took my time learning what those impacts were by getting an opportunity to go to the University of Oxford on a Fulbright to work with John Lord Alderdice in early 2021 on the mental health impacts of cyber defenders after specifically North Korean and Russian cyber attacks. Lord Alderdice was one of the people that drafted the Good Friday Accords in Northern Ireland, and as a result, he might have a thought or two about low-level, constant civilian-involved warfare. Together, we found that it is probable, according to actuaries in multiple different interviews in the United Kingdom, that about 300 people died as a result of not receiving treatment in the National Health Service in the weeks following WannaCry. 13,500 cancer treatment and other appointments that were critical to patient care were canceled in the wake of that. And I have to say, I arrived in Oxford and in the United Kingdom 4 hours before Boris Johnson shut the country down for a 4.5-month COVID lockdown. And instead of going around the country, I spent the entire time doing video interviews of people who had responded personally to WannaCry inside the National Health Service. The people inside hospitals grabbing laptops out of doctors' hands and stopping them from using them as they were in the middle of patient care and in some cases even surgery. And one of the biggest challenges that these incident responders had was making their leadership understand how severe, how serious this attack actually was. What I and Lord Alderdice had done was do video interviews, since I wasn't able to physically go to NHS installations. And it was quite an interesting experience building trust quickly with hackers and people whose names or full names I didn't know to do this kind of research. But what I got in the end is some of the most heartbreaking responses in terms of PTSD and mental health impacts on civilian defenders in nation-state attacks that I've ever heard. What I mostly remember are the stories of incident responders who told me that their leadership didn't understand, their civilian leadership and sometimes non-technical leadership didn't understand the severity of what was happening. I'm not going to forget these quotes. I remember one person who said, it was Friday when we started hearing rumors of things happening in other hospitals. We didn't have a network security team inside this NHS hospital. Our security efforts were nothing but the best efforts of employees keeping up with InfoSec on LinkedIn, Twitter, the usual word of mouth stuff. This was a frontline responder to WannaCry at a major UK hospital. One person said, we started to realize that we might be vulnerable. We'd only just done our migration to Windows 7 and realized our stuff was ancient. We had a large amount of XP and S2003 and 2003 R2 systems at the time they thought were vulnerable to WannaCry. When they got the patch advisory from Microsoft in response to WannaCry, they went into overdrive. They got confirmation that Whittington and Imperial College had been hit. And we cut off all our links to the outside world, which included all other NHS agencies, patient care, everything. It was a complete assload of overtime. His words, not mine. And because of the age of the systems we're talking about, it was manually walking to them, manually installing the patches, and it was a huge effort due to the amount of technical debt within the NHS. Next person says that WannaCry was the moment the chickens came home to roost. Every bad management choice, every bit of underfunding, every lack of staff training and upskilling slammed home that weekend. I listened to British men tear up on video calls with me, asking me if they had done the right thing because they couldn't make their leadership understand what the nature of cyber warfare was and that it was hurting civilians in their hospitals in that moment. And I still remember that on a deep and abiding level. The one that makes me angriest is this one. I'll tell you the one that makes me saddest next. No one was listening to us because it was a weekend. Our CTO bought us pizza and left for holiday on Friday afternoon. We slept under our desks for 90 hours. I'm not actually going to take a shoe off and smack it on something. I'm not going to hit anything right now, but can you imagine a leadership that would leave every incident responder to a nation-state level cyber attack with pizza and a fare thee well? That infuriates me, and I'm sure that it infuriates you too, because the last thing I saw, and the thing I think that maybe broke me more than anything else, was this. The last person I talked to said about WannaCry, I didn't sleep for a week, and then I slept for a week. And for anybody who's done incident response in nation-state level cyber attacks as a civilian, something they shouldn't be doing, something that shouldn't be targeted at them, something we should be protecting people from, that's the thing that reminds me so much that there is a deep misunderstanding between the people who are fighting and defending in cyber war and the people we think in books and in history should be fighting wars. So let's dive down a little bit more into right now and what's happening with current incident response, with the concept of who's actually involved in cyber warfare and what we end up doing about it. Is it possible for somebody to die from a computer attack? I mean, I could just say Dusseldorf and watch everybody's heads nod in here, right? The Dusseldorf attack in September of 2020 was a cyber attack, which we can argue possibly was not as nation state, but we know that a ransomware attack on a hospital in Dusseldorf caused a woman in an ambulance to be rerouted to care that was more than 3 hours away, and that she died en route in a fashion where she could possibly have been saved if she'd been able to go to a hospital that hadn't had its systems shut down. We know it's possible to die from a computer. The challenge that we have internationally, and the reason that there is so much trouble getting statistics on deaths from cyber war, is because there's no way to code cyber war as the cause of death on an international death certificate. One of the most interesting things I learned, Lord Alderdice is a practicing psychiatrist and medical doctor as well, and he explained to me how you fill out a death certificate. I was riveted. Understanding how you code someone's death. Turns out you can have a primary and a secondary cause of death, but it would be the tertiary cause of death that you would say was a computer that did it, right? The kids fighting in the back seat is probably the tertiary cause of a car accident, right? But that may be the ultimate cause of the situation. We just don't have a way to code that in international medical terms. And as a result, we lack actuarial data about how to classify a death that results from somebody not being able to go to a hospital as a result of a ransomware attack. So we have a problem figuring out the numbers around cyber warfare. Where do people even go when they have been attacked, breached, when they've dealt with a nation-state attacker? I've given you the big ones, the ones we all know about. WannaCry, we all understand what happened with NotPetya. We understand that probabilistically Ukrainian people died as a result of the Kiev attacks in NotPetya in 2016 and 2017, right? But the numbers on it are extremely difficult to get. So instead, let's just talk about one person, and it's an accountant in Colorado in the United States. I don't know how many of you are on a family chat right now where your job is to help family and friends with their cybersecurity, but I'm gonna guess it's probably a lot of you. How many of you at the holidays, it's your job to help friends, and there we go, friends and family figure out what to do with their cybersecurity? How do I set up multi-factor authentication? How do I get my email accounts safe? How do I keep myself from having my bank accounts drained? Well, those questions belong to everyone, and they're part of the sliding scale of how we all defend against attacks. But when we bring it down to the personal level, it gets a little harder and a little murkier, and the numbers don't get as clear. I was on a group chat with a friend of mine, a well-known cybersecurity expert, and his accountant told him that the accountant had experienced a data breach and a ransomware attack from what is most likely a North Korean APT. Do you know what the accountant did? This 60-year-old man with a 15-person accounting firm in the middle of Colorado did when he experienced a nation-state cyber attack and a demand for ransom? He called his local police department to report a crime. I don't know how many of you would report a crime to your local law enforcement officers, but they were bewildered and invited him to call his federal agency of choice out of having no idea what to do with this problem. It is as if we are watching all over again in 793, the Vikings hit Lindisfarne in the north of England, bypass the Roman garrisons and military installations, and hit straight at the civilian compounds and the monastery at Lindisfarne, right? What do you go for? The sheep, the women, the silver? Go past the military if you can, because the civilians, the wealthy ones, the ones who don't know you're coming, they're right there. Just go take that and walk away. It's as if we're watching Viking raids all over again. And just because they bypassed the military installations doesn't mean this isn't a nation-to-nation level attack. It's uncomfortable to name it that way because we're not sure what to do about it at that individual level. That is the thing that gets me up in the morning. It's the thing that gets me to some place that is 10 hours ahead of my usual sleep schedule, here angry this morning with you. And I guess I wonder, how do you define doing cyber war in a just and right fashion when we're talking about dealing with civilians being impacted by it? Well, we know that there are rules of warfare. At least I certainly hope we know at this point that there are rules of warfare. In 1139 at the Second Lateran Council, Pope Innocent II declared that the use of crossbows in warfare was illegal and immoral, but only against Christians. So it turns out that we can get really specific about how we direct our weaponry and who we direct it against. And this is one of the first examples of declaring that a weapon was inhumane if you used it against fellow Christians. Not so many mentions of other people in the world who might also be impacted by a weapon like this. There's a lot of conversation around if this was the first example of an explicitly stated concept of just war, but we do know that in 1625, Hugo Grotius's publication of De Jure Belli ad Pacis gave us these two concepts of jus ad bellum and jus in bello. This is first, jus ad bellum, a reason to go to war that is legitimate, and jus in bello, the right conduct of war, the things you're allowed to do in it, right? So this has been our concept of just warfare. This Dutch philosopher, theologian, and theorist gave us these ideas, and we still think about what they mean if we're doing war rightly. So what is cyber jus in bello? What is the right way to do cyber war? Well, we could maybe just go take a look at the Geneva Conventions again. And take a look at the Rome statutes, so of the Hague Conventions. We're going to look at Article 7 and Article 8. Article 7, I don't have to tell everybody here, is crimes against humanity. It's an interesting one, but the truth, and crimes against humanity involves anything attacking civilian installations, especially healthcare installations. I don't know a better word for an attack on the NHS that indiscriminately targeted and harmed civilians than a crime against humanity. It hurt people, it hurt civilians, people that were not in uniform, people that were behind the symbolic, meaningful, and flag on their servers of a Red Cross. Then we've got Article 8. Article 8 is, of course, war crimes. Intentionally, one of the clauses, I have a favorite clause of Article 8, just so that you know. And it is intentionally launching an attack in full knowledge that it will cause or include incidental loss of life or injury to civilians. What the hell was NotPetya, if not that? What was WannaCry, if not that? What is every APT attack against a civilian installation, if not precisely that? Now, there's something interesting about just cyber war, which is that there was a recent Biden administration report, end of this last year, beginning of this year, that describes Chinese infiltration into American critical infrastructure. It's fascinating to me that, and again, I want to note, I'm in public, I'm an academic. I don't have private knowledge that many of you in the military may have, but for public and academically available information, and I'm being very specific on this one, it looks like there are no PRC implants into American healthcare infrastructure. Why? Because in the event of a conflict, that wouldn't violate Article 8. That's fascinating to me. I can't tell you whether or not that's perfectly true. It's the information that we have and that was recently reported, and I would love more information if you have it. Please, for God's sake, give me publicly available information so I can cite it, so I can talk to people about it, because sharing information is better than not. And what I'll ask you is, if you think about the concept of a war crime and we think about who engages in these attacks, how many of you have heard of the concept of perfidy? The idea that you can, the idea that you can feign not being a uniformed soldier, the idea that you can engage in deceptive tactics that make use of the fact that you appear to have surrendered. There's a lot of great examples. As a person who speaks, I always look for a good analogy, but they're still all horrifying. I'm thinking right now of the 2022 Makivka incident. 10 Russian soldiers in a village in Ukraine surrendered to 4 Ukrainian soldiers and left 1 Russian soldier to ambush the 4 Ukrainian soldiers. That's a very visible, very easy to see feigned surrender, and that's perfidy. When I think about the fact that we look as just a civilian, I'm just hands on keyboard every day helping small businesses and people clean up the mess after they're attacked. They don't know and they don't care most of the time who's attacking them. They just want to get back to work. When I think about the people engaging in these attacks, and I think about the fact that there's often a polite fiction that these are contractors or private entities in some of the countries that have been farming people that don't know how to handle themselves in cyberspace. It's not a bad word to use. Pretending that you are not part of a nation-state infrastructure attacking civilians is perfidy. That's the word we're looking for, to draw that connection between people that just look like they're in hoodies and a uniformed soldier attacking the civilian population of another country. It's the excuse. It's the excuse that we're using to explain why it's difficult to understand where cyber war is coming from and who it's attacking. It's because the Vikings are skipping past the stockades and heading straight for the sheep and the rye. Don't get me wrong, the rye and the barley is where you get the really good Northern European liquor. I don't blame them for it. And I have looked into this problem for a long time, and I cannot get out of my mind the man who had to yank a laptop out of a doctor's hands as he was in the middle of surgery, trying to explain that it would be worse overall if he didn't do so, and the person who said that he got fired because he couldn't keep the computers up during WannaCry as the sole incident responder for an NHS hospital. How many of you in this room have tried desperately to explain that just because you can't see this visibly with your eyes, because you can't see the gun, because you can't see the tank, because you can't see the mustard gas, that there's still something real happening? How many of you have struggled with this before? Sir, if you are struggling with this with me, I feel like I'm in good company. I'm going to ask you for some advice on anecdotes that you might use later. I will steal them from you, because I swear all day long what we do is say, this is what this is like. Not what it is, but what it's like. And what I say to generals, what I say to business owners is, I need you to understand that just because something is happening in a way you can't see doesn't make it not real. You understand that just because you can't see the wings of a hummingbird doesn't mean that the hummingbird is levitating magically. It's just happening faster than you can see it. That's what optical fiber is. That's what data is. I could reach out into the air right now, and I am with my hands touching data packets running through this room. All right, it's a little magical. It's a little magical, and I hope, and I'm going to leave time for maybe 2 questions at the end of this. I hope when I think about the people in this room that I am seeing at least some idealism, at least some joy still from getting to touch. It's still magical what we get to do. It's still joy-filled. You can reach out into the air and grab a packet and change it and send it on. And that is incredible to me still. I just wish I could go back to school again and again and do more learning about this incredible and joy-filled field. But I feel like what we don't ever do, especially when we're young enough to let those ideals set, is we don't properly explain the consequences of mass action with computers. I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a dear friend and a very famous InfoSec expert. His name is Malware Jake Williams in the United States. And he was once talking to me about the idea that any of the F-series fighter planes, fighter jets, if you take down an F-35 or an F-18 and you understand and break the systems inside one of those fighter jets, well, you've taken down one plane. But if you can crack one piece of infrastructure, one computer that shares infrastructure and shares the same software with 5,000 other computers, you haven't taken one computer, you've taken 5,000 of them. The scale is so much more massive than we are prepared to understand on an individual tooling basis that it's difficult for people to understand that it's the equivalent of cracking an entire set of problems as opposed to one problem at once. I often use the example for people who need to understand encryption, that cracking, you'll see how many of you have seen in media recently something like signal's been cracked, right? The encryption for signal's been cracked. No, it hasn't. What's happened is that somebody had their phone stolen, or they had a tool on their phone that was able to screen cap and read what was going on their phone. That's not the encryption of Signal being broken. What I often do is explain to people that it's not that Signal's encryption has been broken. If you have a modern car with a key fob, that key fob has an encryption algorithm on it that is paired to your car. And it lets you open it from a distance or right next to your car. And there's a big, big difference between cracking the algorithm on those key fobs so you can open every Toyota in the world remotely, and stealing somebody's keys in the grocery store and stealing their Toyota in the grocery store parking lot. All right? That's often the difference I make, is just explaining that in a way that people can understand. And we spend all day long explaining to people what cybersecurity is like, not what it is. Why? Because it's complicated. We're all experts, we're all specialists in here. And after a while, you start to run out of analogies and you start to get to this place where cybersecurity has to become something we fall back in love with again and again, because you will fall out of it. I'm seeing a lot of faces in this room that are in their mid-20s. This is your first time being in love with cybersecurity and wanting to do this for a living. You're going to have to fall back in love with it again eventually if you want to keep going, because it's exhausting. And yet, I can't think of anything more beautiful and rewarding than this. I do want to leave a couple of moments for questions. But I want to say one last thing as I think about the people in this room, especially the ones in those mid-20s. I saw a lot of you at karaoke last night. I'll see you again tonight. And I'm 46 years old. And this room is filled with people that are 20 years younger than me. And I hope, did you start because of idealism? Are you in this room because of idealism? Good. You're here to get really, really good at war. Keep the idealism, please, all right? Keep the idealism to the best of your capacity, because I need you to make me a better world than I made you, okay? I'd love a couple of questions if you folks have them. Anybody? Go for it. I'll repeat your question back if you say it. Is there a mic?
Good morning, my name is Jason Brown. You mentioned that you were severely disappointed that individual NHL's incident response workers were the front line of defense against a nation state. There's an assumption that the state needs to be involved. And I want to ask you about the iatrogenesis of a state employing its full government and military surveillance and response actions onto the state itself. Is the cure worse than the disease?
That's a wonderful question. Is the cure worse than disease with full coordination across the private and public sectors? Obviously, the end of full coordination across the public and private sectors is a command economy, and then you end up with a bunch of other problems, right? So is the cure worse than the disease? That's hard to say, but what I can say is that there's a near complete break right now between local volunteers, the concept of a cyber national guard in the United States, between local incident responders in private institutions, and any kind of state supervision or capacity or support, at least in the United States. And some of what I've seen in the United Kingdom and in France, where I've had the opportunity to do a little bit more work, there's very little local coordination at all. There's rarely even reporting at this point. We only got a few years ago in 2021 in the United States any kind of mandatory reporting of incidents in cybersecurity and critical infrastructure. We can't even get clarity on what's happening because people who are running local and manufacturing and electric and water companies don't understand when they've been hacked. They don't even know it's happened a lot of the time. So as a result, how do you solve the problem of somebody trying to manage and maintain a US cert? I would love to see that happen in future, and I would love to at least see additional liaising on a local level to get some reporting going. And the answer is it's always going to be complicated, but more information is better about what's happening where so we can build a better picture. I think I can take one more question, is what they're letting me know. Is there anybody in the room? Oh, yes. I think there's a mic.
Hello, and thank you so much. My name is Katie. My question might be a bit childish in a sense that, considering the situation, what we saw with WannaCry and NotPetya both, Western societies have always sort of tried to hold themselves to a certain standard when it comes to war crimes or activities during the war, or the level that we sort of participate in a war. It's a difficult sentence to sort of formulate. Considering that with cyber, a lot of civilians are affected and directed and challenged mentally and physically in general, does it still make sense to have that higher standard when you have to protect not just the military personnel, but also civilians who should be safe from all the horrors of the war?
Thank you, KT. I think this question, does it still make sense to hold ourselves to a higher standard? It's a good question. I don't care. I don't care if it makes sense to hold ourselves to a higher standard. I think we should, and I think you should, whether or not it makes sense, to hold ourselves to a higher standard of behavior and protection of people that can't protect themselves. Thank you, KT. And thank you, folks. It's been a real joy and a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you all in future. Thank you.